Sabrina, did you want one of us to say what's
I think you can say a little bit about Surge. So should I introduce you first, and then you can
I don't have to go first by any means, but I thought it might be nice for the people to know what
do it, and then you can introduce him, and then we can just kind of flow into that.
Okay, but if Mohammed has things to say beforehand, by all means.
Do I need to be watching the time? I mean, they said it was about 30 minutes, but...
I think is that okay, about 30 minutes?
And if it goes 40?
It's fine, because everybody kind of struggles in late. It's probably,
That's fine. I don't have
Yeah, so...
You want to do my presentation?
I've known Akeo for quite a number of years.
Yeah.
Even before I actually converted to Islam.
Oh, wow.
I've been living in his district for pretty much most of the time that I've been living in Des Moines.
Mm-hmm. And when did you convert?
About 7.5 years ago.
Okay. You're the tech person. You're in charge of recording everything today.
Yeah.
Honorary tech person.
Yeah, I do a lot of just video shoots. I protest stuff at the Capitol. I've done. I was out in the rain shooting yesterday.
Oh, did you do the March for Science?
Not the March for Science. Yesterday was.
What was yesterday?
Yesterday was the climate justice.
Oh, okay.
I missed the March for Science because I had a previous commitment.
Yeah, well, this was kind of rough weather to get people out in. So.
Yeah, but over 200 came out yesterday.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so it was a great event.
Good.
So I'll just be recording the speakers. I won't go into the audience.
Okay.
And there's water there.
Yeah, I grabbed one. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, will you please be seated so we can get started, inshallah. Before we get started, I just want to welcome you here and to this the ACLU meeting, which is the American Liberties Civil Liberties Association, and they will talk to you about your rights. But I want to remind you that next week, inshallah, on Saturday the 6th, we will have an open house here. We do have a flyer, so make sure you invite the neighbors and everyone. We just want to reach out to our neighbors. The neighbors have been awfully nice to us. They sent us many letters, cards, flowers, and so on of support. And we would like to reach out to them so that make sure that you let all the neighbors know that we are having an open house so that we can meet them, they can meet us, and we can build some kind of a relationship, inshallah. So that I want to remind you next week, and hope you can come here next week, Saturday at 10 o'clock. It's from 10 to 1. So please come to our open house. Yeah, anyway, between 10 and 1, just stop by. Anyway, I will turn over the microphone to my daughter, Sabrina, and she will introduce.
Assalamu alaikum. We have a full schedule of speakers today. We're going to start off with Yasmina. She is from the Surge group, and their group has helped us coordinate this event, and they do a lot of things for the community. And then we're going to listen to Andy Hiding-Doan. He is going to speak from the ACLU. He is from the ACLU. And then we have Joshua Breyer speaking for us. Is it Breyer?
Bar.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. And he is going to be speaking from the Civil and Human Rights Commission of Des Moines. So I will let Yasmina take this. I will let you do that.
I just have a little bit to say. Probably some of you have heard of SURGE, Stand Up for Racial Justice. So we have a chapter that meets at Drake University, and we have been working with Sabria here here to organize this event with Andy, the volunteer from the ACLU. And just to tell you a little bit about Surge, if you are not familiar with it, it is a group of people in Des Moines. It's a national organization, but our local chapter here in Des Moines meets over at Drake twice a month on Sundays. And Stand Up for Racial Justice is interested in working as allies and taking our cues from communities like yours in offering to help with anything that you are working on. So for instance, a workshop on Know Your Rights, fundraising projects, the Remembrance Day for people we've lost to genocide is something that we're working on in the future. And one of the things that we did recently, to give you an example of what the immigration justice team is doing, is Darcy Vandergrift, who's over here, and she heads this part of the chapter, put together a teacher toolkit for all of the Des Moines schools, and it gives the principals at Des Moines Public Schools and ESL teachers basically step-by-step information on how they might help any of their students or their students' families who are dealing with issues of deportation or ICE raids. So those are the kinds of projects we've worked on in the past. Again, we really try to adhere to the mantra that we are there, we are here to support and take cues from other communities, other populations in Des Moines. So again, we sort of see ourselves as a resource, and if you are ever working on a project where you feel like you would like the support of members of Surge, please feel free to get in contact with me or with Darcy Vandergrift. We're both professors at Drake. I can leave my information here for you, and all are welcome at our meetings. Surge is primarily a group that speaks to how white people from the dominant culture can be more aware of the ways in which we need to be racially conscious and also work to make relationships with minority communities. But again, it is open to all, so if you are ever interested in coming to one of our meetings, please come. Everyone's welcome. And now I'd like to introduce Andy. And Andy is an attorney here in Des Moines, and he'll be taking you through a Know Your Rights workshop. And that's it. Here's Andy. Here's the microphone if you'd like it, but you might not need it.
If I spoke without the microphone, could everybody hear me? Yeah. I think I'll just leave it off then. If everyone can hear me just fine, I think I'll go without, but if anyone's going to have trouble hearing me, I can certainly, I'll just use it just in case. So I'm speaking on behalf of the ACLU, and I'm going to cover really two subjects today. One is what laws protect people against racial and religious discrimination in Iowa and in the United States. And then the ACLU's Know Your Rights presentation, which covers what rights you have specifically when you encounter police, immigration, any other kind of law enforcement interactions. There are a lot of things that surprised me, even having been through law school, and I think that the general public has received misinformation about what must be done to help the police, which sometimes involves abandoning one's own rights. Two things to keep in mind. First of all, this information is current right now, and in fact, the ACLU just finished these materials this week, so it is current. But the law can change at any time. Some laws change slowly, and you hear about a law being caught up in Congress. Immigration laws, in particular, are not subject to that kind of delay. The way that immigration laws are enforced can change on nothing but the president's whim with an executive order. I'm just getting into the immigration arena, but I'm learning about aspects of immigration enforcement that changed the day that President Trump took office, and those changes will probably stick around until another president takes office. So the law can change any time. Second, these are general, I'm talking about the rights that apply to everyone. but the more specific that you get with a particular situation, this is my situation, here's everything that led up to it, the more that it gets into a specific legal problem, that would be giving legal advice, and I'm not permitted to do that here today on behalf of the ACLU. If you have that kind of an inquiry, you can reach out to the ACLU at that email address, and everything will be kept confidential, and you will have an opportunity to talk more about your specific situation. So I'm happy to answer questions, either in the middle of the presentation or at the end, but the more it gets into the specific circumstances of a situation applying to a person, the more that I will defer those questions to be brought directly to the ACLU. So as I said, we're going to talk about your rights to be free from harassment and discrimination on the basis of religion or race, and your rights in interacting with law enforcement. Often that's going to touch on your right to freely practice your religion, because the outward signs of practicing religion are often the reason that a person becomes the victim of discrimination or harassment. So first let's talk about religious liberty. Some of it comes from federal law, some from state law. The federal law, we have the United States Constitution, the First Amendment, which gives the right to free speech, the right to free exercise of religion, and the right, what we call the Establishment Clause, which means the government can't establish an official religion. There's also the 14th Amendment, which guarantees the right of all people equal protection under the laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, that would be the Federal Civil Rights Act, guarantees the right to not be the victim of discrimination. There's also the RFRA, which gives a little bit more protection to a person who is the victim of religious discrimination than would be available to a victim of racial or gender or sexual orientation discrimination. And finally, there's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which covers a couple of the things that we're going to talk about today are houses of worship and individuals who are held by the state. And the RLUIPA applies to those situations. In Iowa, there's an Iowa Constitution that has many of the same rights as the United States Constitution. And then we have the Iowa Civil Rights Act. The Iowa Civil Rights Act is generally a couple of decades ahead of the federal Civil Rights Act in terms of protecting more rights and having access to justice. You will have protection from discrimination in housing, education, employment, public accommodations, any other aspect of your public life generally, and it is similar to the Civil Rights Act. The deadline for filing a claim, if you have been the victim of harassment or discrimination, the deadline to file a claim with the Civil Rights Commission, which is the first step in enforcing those rights, is 300 days. There is no Iowa version of the RFRA, which gave that heightened review, a little bit more protection on religious discrimination in particular, but the Iowa Civil Rights Act generally is pretty aggressive and is as long as it's enforced, as long as people take advantage and, when necessary, speak to an attorney, file a claim, the Iowa Civil Rights Act does a pretty good job. So what kinds of laws or government action would be unconstitutional? Anything that specifically targets a religious belief or a religious practice or a religious group, meaning a law that says only people of a particular faith are prohibited from wearing a particular kind of clothing. There can also be a law that is not discriminatory in its application, meaning it applies to everyone, but it can have a religious impact. It can have a disparate impact, meaning it impacts people of a particular religion more. A law that said a person can't go into a particular place with a head covering is going to impact people of Muslim faith more than people of other faiths because other faiths don't have that focus on head coverings. So even though a law applies to everyone and is supposedly supposed to impact everyone equally, can be discriminatory and it can still be challenged. So even if you can imagine the excuse that a person would give for a law being, well, it affects everyone equally, if that has a disparate impact on a particular religion or a particular race, it still can be challenged either through the Federal Civil Rights Act or the Iowa Civil Rights Act. Sometimes the laws that are set up to protect religious freedom can be used as a sword, as we say, rather than as a shield. The Hobby Lobby case was a classic example where a group of people said, we own a company and we want to stop subsidizing a particular kind of medication because it's against our religion. And under that RFRA, which gives heightened review to religious issues, a private for-profit corporation is entitled to withhold insurance coverage for contraceptives because of their own religious beliefs. The ACLU's position is that these two things can coexist. It doesn't always have to happen like that. We can protect the religious beliefs of some people and still respect the right to practice religion of other people. And so that's really what we're trying to get to in each of these conflicts. You think about discrimination laws applying to the government and saying that the government can't discriminate, but they also apply to the businesses and the people that you encounter in your daily life that are providing housing, goods and services, and financial services for the general public. So public accommodation can mean a store that sells food or clothing or a service like a plumber. Restaurants, bars, hotels, gyms, grocery stores, bicycle shops, any other business is not allowed to discriminate, just like the government isn't allowed to discriminate. Any retail business that's open to the public qualifies as a public accommodation. Even if they offer free services, that's still a public accommodation. Even if they if they get public money from the city, from the state, from the United States, that is a public accommodation. And of course, it applies to governmental offices, departments, services. It means it applies to the city, the state, and the United States. So who does still have the ability to discriminate? A private club, a church, any other religious institution that has a bona fide religious purpose, meaning people really do have a legitimate religious belief, and this is part of it, as opposed to just claiming a religious belief as an excuse to be able to discriminate. If you are looking at housing, then one exception is renting a room in a house where the landlord lives. So if you're renting one room in a house, that is a type of housing that isn't protected by Iowa's or the United States' anti-discrimination laws. So you cannot be turned away from any public accommodation, which we listed on the last slide, because of your religious clothing, because they know what your religion is regardless of your clothing, because you are refusing to remove a religious garment. You are entitled to full and equal enjoyment. That means the same as everybody else. Not only are you entitled to enter and shop and buy and dine and rent and do everything that everyone else is allowed to do, but you must be allowed to do it in the same way as everyone else. So that means there can't be a particular part of the restaurant and they can't have you in only at a certain time. No, you'll be treated, the law guarantees that you will be treated like everyone else. And when you're not, that's when it's time to contact the ACLU or an attorney. And of course, you can't be charged more because of your religion. They can't have any kind of a surcharge because of refusing to wear a religious garment, refusing to remove a religious garment. The Iowa Civil Rights Act has excellent protections against discrimination in housing. You cannot be turned away from renting a house, renting an apartment, buying a house because of religion, national origin, race, anything like that. They cannot discriminate when selling or leasing, writing the terms of a lease or sale. So there cannot, even when an apartment building is open to everyone, there cannot be a clause in the lease that says you cannot practice this particular religion or you cannot wear a particular garment. The protection that the law guarantees should go all the way down to the fine print of the lease, just like it applies to being able to walk in the door. And that applies to guests as well as to the people who are doing the renting. So this includes federally funded housing programs and completely private. The exception, as I said, is an owner-occupied dwelling. If a person is renting part of their own house out and they still live there, then they're allowed to discriminate. Financial assistance or financial services, usually we're talking about banks, lending, any kind of, the kind of public financing that is available to everyone of a certain income, or the kind of private financing that should be available to everyone. You cannot be denied credit for a house, or for a credit card, or for a car because of religion, ethnicity, religious practice, anything like that. Once again, this goes down to the fine print. There can't be any part of the lease or any part of the terms of the loan that have a discriminatory impact on you because of your religion. Employment is an area that gets a lot of attention. You are protected against discrimination in hiring, in firing, in every day that you go to work. You cannot be the victim, the law protects against discrimination on the basis of religion and ethnicity, religious practice, race. Every type of discrimination that is getting attention right now is forbidden under Iowa law and under federal law. An exception would be an employer that has fewer than 4 employees, work to be done in the employer's own home, personal services, or, of course, a religious institution. The most glaring example of discrimination would be in hiring. You cannot refuse to hire a person or prefer a different category of prospective employee because of religion or race or ethnicity. But once a person gets hired, the kind of discrimination that is more insidious, harder to deal with, harder to point out, harder to talk about, is the day-to-day life of an employee. You cannot be harassed on the basis of your religion in such a way that it makes work different for people of a particular religion than for people of the predominant religion. So what does harassment mean? Well, it's anything that changes your job and makes it much more difficult, that's only being applied to people of a particular race or age or gender or ethnicity. That means jokes. It means having the door locked on you when it wouldn't have been locked on someone else. It means pranks that actually create a problem in the way that you do your job. Moving your personal items out of your locker, putting things in somebody else's locker, turning off the showers, turning off the hot water. Anything that makes it harder to do your job, that's being imposed on people of a particular race or religion, that's harassment. That is prohibited, and if it is happening, you ought to go to the ACLU, to the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, or to a lawyer to enforce those rights. An employer is also required to give reasonable accommodations when necessary. So, if there is an aspect of your religion that causes you to need to show up at a different time, or need to do your job a little bit differently, and it really shouldn't create a major burden on the employer, that's what we call reasonable accommodation. They are required to allow, for example, head coverings, even if they have a rule against head coverings, unless it creates an undue hardship. If they really can't do their business, if they really can't do their job because some employees are wearing head coverings, then they can have a rule against it. But the Iowa Civil Rights Commission knows what that sounds like, knows what it looks like, and if they're doing their jobs, they can see through it when somebody's just using that as an excuse. education is, Des Moines is famous for discrimination in schools, for protection against discrimination in schools. There was a case a couple of decades ago called Tinker versus Des Moines, where everyone in the United States was guaranteed the right to free speech at school. Discrimination still happens in schools, and we know it. And the law is set up to protect against discrimination in many of these instances. This is why we want everyone to know, here are your rights. When this is happening, because we know that it's happening, these are the rights that you can count on being able to enforce. Iowa law and federal law prohibit a school from discriminating against students based on religion or ethnicity. That means, of course, they must admit students of all religions equally, but it also means that they must allow students to exercise and express their faith in the same way that other students do, as long as it's voluntary, you're not requiring anybody else to do it, and it's non-disruptive. It's not taking away from other students' education. That means that students are guaranteed the right to be able to wear religious clothing. A school can have, once again, a legitimate dress code that requires every student to dress the same way, for example. That is the kind of thing that can end around a discrimination protection. But most public schools don't have that. Most public schools let kids pick what they wear to school every day. And if they let you pick what you wear to school every day, and you can wear a purple shirt or a green shirt or a white shirt, then you can also wear a head covering. School officials, again, like a public accommodation or a reasonable accommodation, school officials can be required to excuse absences for religious holidays, even when it's a religious minority. Even when it's the only student in the school, they still have to excuse the absence for a legitimate religious holiday. School officials themselves are prohibited from discriminating against students of a particular race or religion or ethnicity, but they are also required to stop discrimination by students when they see it. So, if there's a one-time bully who, commits an act of bullying, the school can be expected to treat that the way that it normally treats bullies. When it becomes an issue of every student in this school who is a member of this religion is being treated a certain way and the school is looking the other way, that's not the bully's problem, that's not the student's problem, that's the school's problem. And the school can be, a complaint can be made against the school for not protecting the students against that kind of discrimination. Federal law also prevents a public school from teaching religion. That's the Establishment Clause. The government can't establish an official religion. That means they can't teach what is the best way to exercise your religion or anything like that. They cannot expect students to participate in a religious ceremony. They cannot prohibit students from participating in a religious ceremony. So now let's talk about places of worship. A place of worship, a church, a mosque, a temple, has to receive the same treatment as every other religious building. There can't be a zoning law or a police response time that affects churches differently from temples, differently from mosques. If there's a problem, if there's a 911 call, we expect the police to respond to it the same way no matter who's making that call. Property damage, if there's vandalism or other kinds of property damage, it is often a more serious crime. There can be more protection for a house of worship than any other kind of building that might get graffiti. Contact law enforcement. That should always be the first response when there has been a crime. If law enforcement isn't responding to it, that's when it becomes an issue of discrimination. Ports of entry. That means borders, airports. We don't have many ports of entry in Des Moines, but where they are, they're often the subject of more rules and regulations and restrictions. Those rules and regulations and restrictions can't impact different religions differently. You can wear a head covering in a port of entry like an airport. If an alarm goes off, if there's a metal detector that says this person is carrying a weapon or whatever it is that causes that alarm to go off, you can be required to remove it for a security check by a same-gender agent in a private area. This is the same rules that would apply to anybody having to remove any garment of clothing. You can't be singled out for questioning or screening on the basis of religion or race or gender. These are tougher to enforce. This is the kind of thing that everybody knows happens on a daily basis at airports in the United States. They're not allowed to go through their day only highlighting, only targeting and searching members of a particular religion. When it happens, as we know it happens, contact a lawyer, contact the ACLU, file a complaint with the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Stops and searches have the same rule. They can stop and search anyone, even if there's no suspicious reason. It can be random. But if it is discrimination, if it is only being applied to members of a particular religion, then it's not random. Then it's not for no reason. It's because of a religious, a discriminatory reason, and that's prohibited. I mentioned a moment ago that there can be more protection for vandalism and property damage at a house of worship. That's because of hate crime laws. A hate crime is a crime committed against a person or their property because of membership in a protected class. We're talking about religion, ethnicity, race. The ACLU supports hate crime legislation because it protects communities and protects against discrimination, but of course the ACLU doesn't support criminalizing speech. A person is still entitled to speak whatever their opinion is about a religion, but when it becomes a crime, then that's it. If it's targeted at a particular group or religion, then that's a hate crime. If you're the victim of a hate crime, again, the first step is to contact the police. Make a record. See what evidence you can see from where you are. You shouldn't prohibit the police from getting access to a particular area where there would be evidence that might lead to the perpetrator being brought to justice. But if you want to take a picture with your cell phone, that's probably a good idea. If you're afraid that something's going to be overlooked, don't let them overlook it. Take a picture of it, point it out, remember it. If it's being ignored, you keep bringing it up until someone stops ignoring it. That is most of the stuff that we're going to talk about on discrimination. Now I'm going to talk about interactions with law enforcement. What are your rights? What are the rights of non-citizens? What is your right to videotape? And what are your rights at a port of entry? In general, we're going to talk about your rights. We're not going to tell you how to use them. We say that everybody ought to use their best judgment. There are going to be police officers, immigration officers, airport officials who violate people's rights. And I wish that we could, eliminate that, but we all know that we can't. When it happens, the way to deal with it is in a courtroom with the Civil Rights Commission, with a lawyer, with the ACLU. A person can lose the ability to win their case. If they have been the victim of some unfair, unconstitutional action by the police or by immigration officers, they can lose that high ground by resisting arrest, challenging things in a way that's going to interfere with the police. Judges and jurors know the difference between resisting arrest in a violent way and resisting arrest in a way that is simply enforcing rights. If you are stopped on the street by the police or by the FBI, this is law enforcement, actual police officers, you have the right to remain silent. Everybody has the right to remain silent, always, all the time. That means people who are citizens of the United States, legal permanent residents, people who are here without documentation, everybody has the right to remain silent. You can say it out loud. The best thing to do, even though we're talking about it as the right to remain silent, is to say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. I'm going to remain silent. When you do that, you're letting everybody know I'm not going to answer any more questions. And so if they keep asking you questions, and you keep on being silent, everybody will know why you're doing it. So it's best to say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. It's best to exercise that right before they get to the one question that you didn't want them to ask. You can refuse to consent to a search of your house, of your person, of your car. You can always ask if you're free to leave. That is the cutoff, that's the threshold for some of these rights. When a person is in custody or detained, certain rights apply, and they don't apply when you're still free to leave. So you ought to know when you're free to leave. You can ask a police officer, am I free to go? Do I have to stay here? Are you requiring me to be here? Sometimes they will say, no, you're not required to be here. Yes, you are free to leave. And if they say that you're not, then those other rights attach. If you're stopped in a car, if you see the flashing lights, pull over right away. Once again, don't give them an excuse to do more than they have to do. Turn off the car, open the window, put your hands on the steering wheel so that, again, don't give them any excuses. Show your license and registration and proof of insurance if you are the driver. A passenger doesn't have to show identification, even if they're asked for it, because they often are. A passenger does not have to have a driver's license to ride in a car. A driver has to have a driver's license to drive a car. Both the driver and all of the passengers have the right to remain silent. But they do have to show the identification. So when can police officers search a car without consent? You can refuse to give consent to a police officer, but if they have reasonable suspicion that a car contains evidence of a crime, they can search without your consent. This is the kind of thing that gets challenged in court later. If a police officer begins searching, then they're going to search and they're going to find whatever's in there, but that doesn't mean that the rights have been lost. That is something that you remember. You write down the details, you videotape it if you can, and you bring it up later with your lawyer. Profiling means making a judgment about the kind of people who are likely to have committed a particular crime, or likely to commit crimes in the future, or likely to be our suspect on this crime when we don't actually have any evidence about who committed it. A profile can include characteristics of a particular race or religion. Racial profiling, ethnic profiling, religious profiling are illegal. They violate the United States Constitution and the Iowa Civil Rights Act. The ACLU has a campaign against racial profiling that fights against law enforcement, so we want to hear about it. If there is racial profiling happening, if people are being stopped for no good reason, and everybody knows that it's because of the color of their skin, or it's because they are members of a particular faith, let the ACLU know about it. So again, if you're questioned by the police or the FBI, the best thing to do is stay calm. Keep your hands where the police can see them. Ask if you're free to leave. If they say that you are free to leave, leave. If you are under arrest, if they're holding you, you have a right to ask why. And you can say, I wish to remain silent. And another important thing that you have to say out loud, even when you're exercising that right to remain silent, I want a lawyer. I don't want to talk until I have spoken to a lawyer. From that point on, as I say, other rights attach. Once you have said that, if they keep questioning you, the things that if a person thereafter answers a question and speaks, it's possible to have that thrown out later in court. But the best thing to do is to speak and say, I am exercising my right to remain silent, I want to talk to a lawyer, then you don't have to say another word. You do not have to consent to a search, but if a person is arrested, they will almost always be searched as what they call incident to an arrest. They might think that a weapon is going to get into the jail, for example, or get into the squad car, and that's one of the times that a search can happen. But if the arrest is illegal, discriminatory, done without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, then anything they find in that search is also going to be thrown out. In Iowa, there isn't a law that says you have to give your name or any other information during a temporary stop, but if you're driving, you have to give your driver's license. So again, you're walking down the street, you don't have to show your ID. You're a passenger in a car, you don't have to show your ID, even if they ask for it, because they will ask for it, and it will sound authoritative. But a person doesn't have to show their ID in that situation. So when can the police or the FBI enter your home? We'll talk in a little bit about immigration because it's different. Immigration officers are not police officers. Police and FBI can enter a home when they have a valid search warrant. A search warrant is a warrant signed by a judge, a real judge, not an immigration judge. A a police officer who has an arrest warrant, meaning we don't know where this person is, but now we have an arrest warrant to arrest them, and now we found out where they are. They're inside that house. If they believe the subject is in the premises, then they can enter a home. The third way that the police can enter a home is with consent. Consent means you give them permission to come in and look around. Consent can be given by an adult. It can be given by someone who is an adult but isn't a resident of the house. It can be given by a child. A child who gives consent to a police officer to come into the home, that counts, that's valid. The police can come in if they're let in by a child. So when they come to the door and they ask to come in, they knock on the door, you can ask to see the warrant. If they don't have a warrant, you can say, I don't want to talk to you, and they can't come in. If they do have a warrant, you should ask them to slide it under the door. Or you can step outside and close the door and look at it. What you're looking for when you look at a warrant is the signature of a judge. When we talk about immigration in a moment, you'll see that immigration officers, immigration enforcement, have a thing that says warrant at the top, but it isn't signed by a judge. So look for a signature, and it has to say judge or magistrate judge. If it does, that's a warrant, and they have the right to come into the house. If they insist on coming in, let them know that they don't have your consent. This is how you win the battle later. If they come in and they don't have a warrant, and they're coming in against your consent, you have to make sure everybody who's there knows that they didn't have your consent, so that nobody can say, well, he said outside that I could come in. Don't interfere. You can be arrested, and you can lose the ability to see what's going on and so on. So don't resist arrest, once again. Even if they have a warrant, even if they have the right to come inside, even if somebody else has already given them consent to come inside, that doesn't require you to speak to law enforcement. So, as I said, you have the right to remain silent. Always. Everybody, everywhere, every time. You always have the right to remain silent. But you should say that. You should say, I'm invoking my right. I'm going to remain silent. I'm not going to answer any more questions. I want to talk to a lawyer. If a person is arrested, you shouldn't resist arrest. Even if it's unfair, even if it's illegal, even if it's unjustified. The way to win that battle is not with the police officer who's holding handcuffs. It is with a judge in a courtroom or a jury. Argue it later in court. You have the right to ask why you're being arrested. You have the right to still remain silent. We suggest that you invoke it out loud. And it's very likely that you're going to be searched because of the search incident to arrest. You do have the right to make one local phone call. The enforcement of that right is all over the map in terms of which person it is who's taking you to which jail, but you have the right to make a phone call. And you have the right to an attorney. Even if you can't get a lawyer on the phone, you still have the right to wait until you do have a lawyer there with you before you speak to law enforcement. If you are witnessing an arrest, if someone else is being arrested, you still shouldn't arrest, you still shouldn't resist, you shouldn't interfere. You can point out someone's rights without interfering, of course, and you have the right to record, videotape, audio record, take pictures, call somebody on the phone, post it on Facebook, do a Facebook Live, let everybody know what's going on. A bystander doesn't have to turn a device over to the police, doesn't have to let it be searched, certainly doesn't have to let the police delete anything. So, let's talk about what if a person isn't a citizen, doesn't have legal documentation to be in the country. They don't have to say anything about immigration status. If you are a non-citizen and a federal immigration agent or official, this is the people who are not police officers, but are immigration officers. If they ask for immigration paperwork, you're required to show it if you have it. If you're over 18 and you have papers, you should carry them all the time, everywhere. Get another copy of if you don't want to carry your green card around, get another document that you can carry around that isn't so expensive to replace. A good example of a document that you can carry around is a copy of a child's birth certificate. If you have a child born in the United States, carry the child's birth certificate. There are some kinds of immigration enforcement that are worse for people who have only been here for a short time. And it is advantageous, counterintuitive, to say. You would want to make sure you can convince a law enforcement officer that you've been in the country illegally for a longer time. But sometimes that's important. And when that's the way that you can protect against it without actually making that kind of confession is by carrying the birth certificate of a child born in the United States more than a year ago. That's going to show that a person has been in this country for a period of time without showing any other kind of information. You should never lie. A person who doesn't have documentation shouldn't ever say that they do. I have my papers at home. They shouldn't ever use anybody else's name or social security number, papers, anything else like that. Those things make the problem worse every time. Nobody ever gets away with it all the way to the end of the case. It's best to just not say anything at all. If a person is arrested, some convictions, this is arrested by the police, some convictions can affect immigration status, so you should only talk about your immigration status with an attorney. And make sure that the attorney knows what the implications are of immigration status and what's going to happen to a person's immigration status if a particular crime goes to conviction. Everybody need to get that? Yeah. So if immigration is at your door, this is what we talked about a moment ago, an administrative warrant from immigration that is not signed by a judge doesn't give immigration the right to come into your home, ever, even if it is an immigration warrant, an administrative warrant for the detainer of a particular person. And they can see that person through the window. They know that they're right there. This isn't like an arrest warrant. It doesn't give them the right to come into the home. They can detain a person, but they can't force them into a home unless they have a warrant signed by a judge, a real warrant that has a judge's signature on it. So, it doesn't matter what your status is. A person who is in this country and doesn't have documentation has the right to refuse entry, has the right to refuse police officers coming into a home, just like a person who was born here. The reason is because the police have to listen when somebody tells them they can't come inside without asking for that person's paperwork. If you are inside, you have the right to, if you are in charge, if you're the person who's speaking to the police through the door, you have the right to refuse a search without being asked for your own paperwork. You can ask the police officers, the immigration officers, for their credentials, badge. You can ask them, are you the police? Are you immigration? And so you can find out which one they are. And you can ask if they have a warrant. They can slip it under the door, like we said. Photographing and videotaping police officers in a public space is always legal. You have the right to photograph or videotape or audio record anything in plain view. Federal buildings, transportation facilities, airports, government officials carrying out their official duties, arresting someone who's violent, arresting someone who's not violent, doesn't matter. You have the right to videotape. If this is private property, the property owner makes the rules. So they can say no videotaping of anybody, no videotaping of the movie theater screen, no videotaping of anything else. The police can order somebody to stop anything that is really interfering with law enforcement. Videotaping isn't ever really interfering with law enforcement. They can confiscate your phone to look at the videos and pictures only if they have a warrant or if they have your permission. Don't give them permission if you don't want them to. The police are not allowed to confiscate or look at your phone without a warrant, without your consent. They definitely can't delete anything. You can always refuse to give consent. At a port of entry, this is the airport, like we talked about, a seaport or border. The agencies that you're going to run into would be Customs and Border Protection, CBP, TSA, Transportation and Safety Administration, and any other law enforcement. It could be immigration, could be the police department. Anyone can be searched, even if they're not suspicious, for any reason, for no reason, for a random reason, but they cannot be profiled because of religion. So, a person can be targeted, a person can be selected at random. But if you see that everybody who's being selected at random is a Muslim, that's discrimination. That's no longer random, and that isn't legal. A strip search really shouldn't ever happen, but it has to be supported by reasonable suspicion and has to be done in a private area. Electronic devices are different at a port of entry at an airport than they are anywhere else. The law isn't clear, and this is the subject of battles that are happening right now. The ACLU disagrees, but the government is performing searches, and people are being forced to give their password. And a person can be detained entry if they don't give their password. Again, this is an area where the law isn't clear, and it's hard for us to say you definitely can refuse to give this. If you're in an airport, the rules might be different, and we can't expect any particular outcome yet. That's it. I'm happy to answer questions. Can someone hit the lights, or I can?
Yeah, the switch is there.
I assume you can. It's got a USB. Oh yeah, we have these Know Your Rights cards. I skipped over that part, I guess. These are only in English. We're working on having someone translate them into other languages, but the best thing to do is to know how to enforce your rights in English. The phrase, I am exercising my right to remain silent, I want to talk to a lawyer, it should work to express that in any language, but it's best to be able to express it in English because everybody who's around will know what's going on.
It's in Spanish. I would offer to translate if we needed to in Spanish.
Does anybody have any questions for Andy? Yeah, they have no questions. Does anybody phone? Oh, you have a question? Yeah.
I would suggest Somali. You can get it in Somali and either Pashto or Urdu. I would suggest those languages also.
How far a free speech can go to be categorized as a hate speech?
Well, yeah, those are the most interesting Supreme Court cases. Those are the ones that we took exams about in college. The answer is if it's inciting violence. If you're saying, let's go get all of the blank, that's hate, that's inciting violence, and that's not free speech. You don't have a right to say that. Nobody does. They don't have the right to say it about you. You don't have the right to say it about them. But to say awful, horrible, false things about a particular person or religion or a place, that's legal. That's free speech. You have the right to be wrong and stupid and ignorant and an idiot and a jerk. But you don't have the right to inspire violence.
A group could say, let's kick out the Muslims out. If I say, go on and say, out the road, let's kick out all the Christians.
You know, if you're saying, let's pass a law, then that's probably not inciting violence. If you said, let's go get them right now, let's round up the posse and go get them, that probably is hate speech. Any other questions? Thank you very much for allowing me to come in and speak.
We have another speaker, Joshua Myers. He's coming. He's here from the Human Rights Movement. Thank you so much, Andy. While he gets set up, is this anybody's phone? Nobody's phone? It's my new phone?
I can always pass it on.
Okay.
Is it PowerPoint?
Yeah. So let's not cut the lights off. I'm a little sleepy. So. How's everybody doing? Before I start, I'm actually going to pass the mic to my boss, Mayor County. I wanted to say a few words about the city of Des Moines and what we do. So without further ado, Mayor County.
Well, I'm actually here to listen and get educated here. It's sort of interesting that we bring up Tinker versus the Board of Education, which is a real interesting Well, actually, it's Des Moines Independent Community Schools District. But some of us were in Des Moines at that time. I don't know, Kale, were you here when that happened? It happened in our high school, Roosevelt High School, and then also in North, and maybe in a couple others around town. And it was interesting how it was interpreted in each of the schools and what happened. And some of the kids, they took their armbands off. They were worried about getting expelled. And so some of them actually did something different. Instead of wearing a black armband, they decided to dress in black the rest of the year. And it was interesting, and it would be if I was a parent or one of those students, because those students, everybody knew what they were doing, and some of those students were actually harassed in school. And the question I would have had at the time was, I wonder if they have a case also, because they wore those black outfits, they were protesting the Vietnam War and saying that there ought to be some other solution to it than what was going on at that time. And these kids would be walking around and up and down the stairways, and other students were spitting on them. Well, to me, that's a problem. And it's certainly not respectful to those kids that were exercising some of their First Amendment rights. But so the question, I guess, goes to today. What are we in the city of Des Moines? And we have made a number of presentations, whether it has to be country of origin or the way people look or their religion. Des Moines, we're receptive and supportive of everybody, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of religion, regardless of age. We try to protect everybody, whether they're citizens, whether they're visitors, and we don't discriminate. We don't pull people over and because of certain things. There were a couple of instances recently that I got some calls. They said, well, we understand that ICE was out and they arrested some people. Well, I looked into a couple of those cases, and I can't tell you I looked into every one of them, but I made a couple of calls. They said, yep, there were some arrests made of some individuals who were out of Texas that had been arrested in Des Moines who were illegal aliens. They had come from another country illegally. But they weren't arrested because of that. They were arrested because one had committed murder and the other one had robbed either a bank or a C-store down in Texas, and they had fled Texas and ended up in Iowa. They will not be deported. They're going to go to prison. And not because of the actions that people thought were taken because they were from another country. It's because they committed a crime. So keep that in mind. Des Moines will protect anyone who has had a crime committed against them. And we're not going to ask you, specifically, produce your passport or any proof of residency. If you've had a crime committed against you, we're going after the person that perpetrated the crime on you. So we want to protect everybody. We want to be Des Moines to be a welcoming place for everyone, and we're going to protect your rights, and we're going to do everything in our ability to make that happen. And I pledge that to you. I pledge that to all of our citizens of Des Moines and all of our visitors. So not to be any main part of this program, I just want everybody to know that, and thank you for having us come, and I appreciate the education we're getting here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Joshua Barr. Josh?
Yes. One question. I know language matters and words matter, and there's been a huge debate about the issue of the illegal alien. To call another human being illegal and alien, I think is kind of offensive, and I would recommend using the terms undocumented immigrant, because words are insidious, words matter, and being a mayor, I think it's important for you to send that message to the citizens in our city that no one is an illegal alien. Yes, there are legal definitions out there, but to call another human being illegal just because of their presence or an alien I think is offensive to some people. So maybe using terms like undocumented immigrant, I think would be more prudent.
Okay, I take that. In this particular case, they were identified as that. but we didn't allow them to be taken away by ICE for that. They went straight to jail, and for a crime that they committed, not for anything else. But I take your comment and I appreciate it.
All right. Actually, I'm gonna be honest. ACLU did my whole presentation. I'm not playing. So I'm really going to talk about real life. There's one thing to give a presentation. There's another thing to actually talk about things that are actually happening in the community. So I'm really going to just keep it real, as my people would say. So I'm not going to go through a bunch of legal jargon. I am an attorney by trade, but I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to just talk about life here in Des Moines, life here in Iowa, life here in the United States. So first I'll introduce myself. My name is Joshua Barr. I am the director of the Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission. And this photo, I don't know if you all can really see it that good. Maybe they do need to cut the lights off. But
turn off on half.
But keep y'all like one. Yeah. No, that's perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So that photo has been fairly recent. So I'm still quite young. still quite young. And the primary thing you need to know about me, I want to just be honest. I'm a civil rights attorney by trade. I was a civil rights attorney for the state of South Carolina. That's my native state. But primarily, I want to just talk about the office real quick, and then I'll get to real life situations. The Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission, our slogan is to advance opportunity and justice for all. I don't want you to just be in Des Moines with just the bare essentials. I want you to have the bare essentials. That's food, clothes, shelter. But I also want you the ability to move up the social economic ladder, to be everything that you aspire to be, and that there are no barriers, especially governmental barriers, that stand in your way from being whatever you desire to be, whether you're one of these young lads of 4 or 5 or somebody who is 30, whatever you want to be. I don't believe there should be any barrier that stops you from getting there, especially by the government itself. So in our mission to advance justice, promote equality, and ensure the protection of all human rights for all people in Des Moines, that's whether you're a citizen, a resident, you're a visitor, you just came here for 5 minutes to see your grandma, we want you to all be protected. So we accomplish this primarily through investigations. We investigate cases of unfair treatment and discrimination. A lot of that really takes place by people coming to our office to make complaints. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. We also do education and outreach. This is part of that. We do trainings. This is part of that. We do community engagement. I go out to different communities and meet with citizens about whatever their concerns are, trying to get them connected with the resources they need to succeed. In the event that we do find that someone was illegally discriminated against, we do investigate, or we do litigate those cases, and we do mediations as well. Now, another thing that we do is testing. Testing is where we get cases where someone says, I was denied housing because I went and looked at an apartment. I was wearing a hijab, and I think the person treated me differently because I was wearing a hijab. We had a real case like that. And so what we did was we sent another person with a hijab, another Muslim lady, to look at the apartment. And then we sent someone who, we sent a white female. And it was a completely different treatment between the two of them. The lady with the hijab, he's like, just look. Do you want it? No? All right, bye. The other person, I mean, and I'm exaggerating a little. It was actually worse than that. The white female came, and this actually happened in Des Moines. He showed her the place, took her around the yard, said, we have such great neighbors here. The other lady, he didn't have any answers to her questions. I don't know. I just bought this place, and completely different treatment. We actually went through and investigated that case. So there are real cases out there of people being treated differently. I can give a lot of real examples of real things happening. Now, One reason why we do this work is that very last line, affecting city policies and practices. There's no point in me speaking here today. There's no point in us conducting investigations. There's no point in having these brochures interacting with the community if we don't identify issues and then try to find ways to alleviate or cure that problem through city policy, through city practices. That's ultimately why I'm here. I'm not just here just to investigate, but I'm here to make sure that we try to strive to be better than whatever the status quo presently is. Now, as I stated, we are a law enforcement agency that enforces equal opportunity laws. They're all up there. I won't read them all. Once again, I'm not getting into the legalese. We just know if you're treated differently based upon characteristics which you cannot control, which you consider your race, religion, your color, your national origin, your sex, sexual orientation, gender identification, or even if you have children, you are protected under the laws of Des Moines. So, once again, he did most of my presentation. I'm just going to talk about a few things. Public accommodations, he spoke upon. I want to talk about municipal practices. It is illegal in Des Moines for a city employee to treat you differently because you walk into the city clerk's office, for example, and you speak another language. They can't say, well, sorry, you don't speak English, I can't help you. We have a language line. We can get translators, someone to assist that person. That is a requirement. They cannot treat you differently because you don't speak the language. You can't walk into my office, and if you struggle with the English language, I'm saying, sorry, well, go back when you can speak better English. You can't do that. We have to be able to serve you, and if we can't, you can file a case in our office. You can also file with the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, because that's where I'll send the case anyway. They won't let me investigate against the city. But ultimately, we investigate employment, housing, public accommodations, and municipal practices cases to do this last thing. We want to foster mutual understanding and respect amongst the citizens, residents, visitors of the city of Des Moines. Now, once again, he did my whole presentation. It's actually really fast. I just want to talk about a few special things that I've seen here in Des Moines, and then I'm going to really throw it out to you all. So, I just want to talk about some special cases that I've seen. I'm going to give real examples. So, a lot of common things that I've seen here in the city of Des Moines. Number one, sexual harassment is a pretty common claim amongst a number of people. And a lot of times, I find that at least among immigrants and new Iowans or new Des Moinesians, they don't understand that that is not allowed. I run into people who work at various businesses here in the Des Moines area, and managers trying to coerce them to do sexual favors, and they're confused about should they do it. I'm like, well, actually, no, you shouldn't, but I could lose my job. I'm like, well, don't lose your dignity in the process. So sexual harassment is against the law. No one can coerce you to commit sexual favors in order to keep your job. That is against the law. And if that is happening, you can contact our office. We'll work to help you. Some people are very afraid to do that, and we don't try to force people to do it, but we do try to talk with you, try to give you some advice on things that you can do. So sexual harassment is against the law. It's also illegal for females to sexually harass men. I just have to say that as well. So religious discrimination. We've actually seen an increase in religious discrimination cases over the past 5 years here in the city of Des Moines. I've only been in Des Moines 19 months, but we've seen an uptick over the past few years in regards to religious discrimination. Number one is ACLU mentioned, employment accommodations. If, for example, your religion requires that you pray 3 times a day. Now, he doesn't necessarily have to grant all 3 unless there's no hardship in him granting it. For example, we had a case where a gentleman he was a bus driver. Okay. Oh, something 5. Okay. All right. Thank you. So, if you drive the bus and you have to be on that route for 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes that's during your time of prayer, it's a hardship for the bus route to stop so you can prepare to give the prayer. But if you can go on your lunch break and there's no hardship, they should allow you to do that. If anything that would not put some sort of strain, because the bus route is a little tricky because you have to be on time. You have to make sure that people get to their places of destination on time. So, but if there is no hardship, they should allow it. For example, if there is a room that other employees have the ability to access freely, and you want to access that during your time of prayer, they shouldn't tell you, nah, we don't allow it for that. If they're allowing everybody else to use it for that, you can use it as well. We had a real case on that very same situation where they were allowing some people to do it, but when someone requested time for prayer, they were like, nope, won't allow it. That is discriminatory. That is illegal discrimination. For example, housing. I already gave the housing example where they didn't want to rent to a lady with the hijab. Familial status. This is really common in housing. If you have children and you try to rent an apartment and they tell you you can only live on the first floor if you have children, that is actually incorrect. If an apartment is available on the 3rd floor and